Hi, Chris Parkin here, and I'm a member of Rotary Camera Club and a tutor for SAT, and I'm just going to be talking to you today about printing and matting specifically for club competitions, and hopefully in a way that means that you can reuse your mats as time goes on. So let's get stuck straight in. First of all, when you're doing a print, the same issues apply to when you're viewing your images on a screen. You need to make sure that things are calibrated. Now, I'm going to be presuming that you're taking these into a store, and so one of the things that is advisable to do is to get a print of a test screen on their machine, and then it gives you two advantages to this. One, you know that their machine is calibrated properly, and two, when you take this test print home, you can then sit it next to your own screen at home and play with your screen until it matches the print, or at least more closely, and that'll give you more of an idea of what something is going to look like when it's taken from your screen and actually printed on paper. And obviously the light that you're looking at it under, and particularly the colour of the light and the intensity will change what you're actually viewing it for, but at least you have a starting point. I'm not going to go into full calibration for your own printers, etc., because that's an entirely different kettle of fish, and generally this is for people just starting out. So if you're interested in that, there's a lot of resources out on the net, and it's certainly something that you can spend hours and hours looking at. So we'll skip on and presume that you've got that sitting next to you. So the next thing to deal with is your crop sizing. And I recommend that you do your sizing on the computer at home when you've got time to play with, rather than taking them in and then working out the sizes. And there are two main types of sizes, or two main ratios that you'll be dealing with. That's the 4x5 or the 8x10, which is the standard print size, and then the 4x6 or the 8x12. So when you're looking at those two on the computer, 4x5 and 8x10 are the same ratio, they're the same width to height. So it doesn't matter whether or not you're planning on printing it out as an 8x10 or as a 4x5, it's going to be the same ratio that you're cropping to, which makes life a little bit easier. The thing that does change is the resolution, and that's based on how much resolution your camera's got. And as long as you're over, generally 200 dpi or dots per inch, then you're looking at a high quality print. You can sometimes get down to that 75 dpi and still get something that's going to look reasonable. But if in doubt, have a talk to the person doing the printing for you. And then for a 4x6, you'll note that it's a little bit longer and narrower, or taller and skinnier if we turn it up the other way. And for an 8x12, it's the same ratio. If we just divide those squares up, nothing changes. However, let's go and have a look at what that means in the real world. So this is an image of the Vestal Virgin in Chatsworth House, and at the moment the crop ratio is as it was originally taken, and in this case it's a 4x6, and obviously I'm using Lightroom, and you can change through your aspect ratios. You can do the same thing in Photoshop, but generally I find Lightroom is much more friendly for doing this type of work. So what happens if we change it to an 8x10? Well, we lose a little bit off the top and or the bottom, and obviously you can recompose in the computer and choose where that cutoff is going to happen. Now, if you then take an 8x10 image, and say you've already exported it and you're going to take it into the shop, and you realize that actually you wanted to print it as a 4x6, what happens is you end up losing even more of the information. So this is why I recommend doing it at home, making sure that you do the crop in the comfort of your own home without the rush, and you can make sure that you're actually getting the crop that you want. So if we rescale this back up, we're going to include all of that extra detail and give her some space around the outside. If, however, you make the mistake of going to the shop with it already exported and cropped too small, and then try and change sizes, you can lose some of that extra detail. So, right before you go, do check when you're in the shop that you've actually gone and selected the image to the correct size print. Don't apply the auto correction, and most of the machines will have that option nowadays that you can choose to apply auto correction or you can choose not to, and it's advisable that you don't, because if you've got a large amount of white in the image, it will deliberately darken down your camera, just like your camera on auto would on a bright sunny day out on the beach will underexpose your image. The printer will do exactly the same thing. And do check your prints in store often. Stores will have a satisfaction guarantee. If they don't, then generally the store will be happy to work with you to work out what's going on. And the other thing that I'll often do is, if I take that print and I'm not quite happy with it, I'll take it home, adjust my monitor to look like the print, and then make the changes and take it back, and that generally fixes up the print. Be careful if you do that, because of course you're changing what you're seeing on your monitor and you need to change it back and recalibrate it for the internet or for digital projected images later. Alright, so let's have a look at the mats. Now this is a picture of a mat board, and generally they're 20 inches by 16 inches, and goodness knows why they're those sizes, but that's the PSNZ sizing for Natex, and it's a general size that's used, and often clubs will have frames that mats can go into, and if your club does, then it's worth checking with them so that when you get your mats cut, you can reuse those frames for club displays and stuff, just to try and generally save money, because you're looking at $15 to $20 for a standard mat, potentially quite a lot more, depending on what relationship you and your club has with the mat cutter. So we're going to go down the cheap is cheerful option and go for a reusable version. If you're printing specific random sizes of say panoramas for images, you're not going to be able to do reusable mats. But if you're printing and you're staying with a set size, either that 8x10 or 8x12 prints, then you can set your mats up so that they're reusable. So one of the tricks is to make sure that when you get your mat cut, you get the cutout centered in the frame, and you'll note that most of the time we actually go for a cutout that's centered a little bit higher, and that's slightly more visually pleasing, but it has one major disadvantage. If you try and tip it on its side, you can't reuse it as a portrait. You're stuck with it as a landscape or stuck with it as a portrait, whichever it's cut for. So if you're wanting a truly reusable mat, make sure that you ask for it centered, and that's going to allow you to reuse it no matter what your orientation of your image happens to be. Okay, so if we open up the mat board, comes usually in two pieces, the mat board itself and a core flute or expanded polystyrene board with paper on each side. Lay them out, line them up nicely, and then sellotape down the centre. And that's going to give you a hinge that you can open the image up. Just close it again, readjust it, make sure it's lined up, and you're good to go. The next thing you want to do is put 3 pieces of fairly wide tape on the bottom of the board and another 3 in the same place on the top. And what that's going to allow us to do is to paste double-sided tape in between later, and when you peel it apart, hopefully the double-sided tape will peel off the wide sellotape and not rip your mat board. If you don't put that tape down, then your mats can get torn up and ripped as you're reusing them. So if you're permanently mounting them, then it doesn't matter. You don't need that extra tape, but it's useful. So we're going for a portrait orientation for this one, and you'll need a piece of tape across the top, just overlapping where the top of your image is going to be, and another piece down the bottom. Obviously, if we're going for a landscape orientation, you'll want them in the opposite positions. I put them in as a slightly lighter colour there for you. So overlay your photo, close your mat up, make sure that things line up, and then very carefully, preferably with your hand still on the photo so it doesn't move, open it back up and run a very thin, small piece of tape along that top edge to hold it in place. It's just going to be touching, and you want to then close your mat back up, check that you can't see the sellotape, and if that's all good, then we can put 2 extra dots, either double-sided tape or photo dots underneath, obviously, to ensure that the photo doesn't slip. Okay, so close it up again, make sure that everything's still lined up, because at this point you then put double-sided tape on all of those places and close it, and you're done. And hopefully that will survive going to a judge quite happily, and when you get it back, if you decide that you're going to reuse the mat, you can then peel it apart carefully, peel your image out, and then reuse the mat, and you're good to go. So maintaining your mats, a couple of things to be aware of. If you get marks on a black mat, you can get a very slight damp cloth and just gently rub over the mat, and you need to wet basically the whole of the mat to the same extent, and it will brush out those marks. If you've got marks on a white mat, however, that doesn't tend to work. You're better off using a white eraser and just rubbing it out. If you get bent corners, providing you're not putting these into frames, then you can get a very, very sharp Stanley knife or craft knife and cut those corners, but do make sure you get them straight. And eventually the mats get deteriorated, so you can't use them. But yeah, hopefully that gives you some ideas, and if you have any further questions, then please ask.